Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering WotC CEO gets fired, leaves company immediately. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from ICV2.com, Wizards of the Coast president resigns. Wizards of the Coast is a company owned by Hasbro. Hasbro has had its own problems lately, laying off 1,000 employees here and 1,000 employees there. They've laid off a massive amount of their staff. Of course, Hasbro has made a lot of woke changes to their products. For example, from the New York Times, Mr. Potato Head brand goes gender neutral. Hasbro is dropping the name of Mr. from the logo and overall brand to promote gender equality and inclusion, but clarified that Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head will still be available. Okay, why was that necessary? What customers were actually asking for that? Were you guys listening to your customers when you made a change like this? No, they weren't. They weren't listening to anyone. From the Daily Wire, viral Facebook post details changes to Hasbro's Game of Life. Wokeness ruins everything. So it's not just the Game of Life, and it's not just Mr. Potato Head. From the New York Post, Monopoly scraps outdated community chess cards to appeal to woke folks. Yes, they own Monopoly, but it's not just Monopoly too. From Out.com, the gays are loving Hasbro's new reimagined Clue game characters. Why do they need to make these changes? Why is this necessary to sell additional copies of your games? It's not really necessary. It's just something they want to do. Of course, they get subsidized to do things like this from major investors like BlackRock and Vanguard. All these companies do. But they do it because it's ideological. They do it because they want to make these changes. This woman, Cynthia Williams, is out at Hasbro's Wizards of the Coast division, which also included Dungeons & Dragons. Here's an example of where her head was at when she was supposed to be focusing on being the president of a very important division for Hasbro. From Bounding Into Comics, providing some insight as to why Wizards of the Coast stumbled so much while Williams was in charge, as revealed by Williams herself in a 2022 interview with GeekWire's Thomas Wild. Rather than ensuring their products remained accessible, affordable, and compelling, her main leadership focus for Wizards of the Coast was instead the continued promotion of diversity across both Magic the Gathering and Dungeons & Dragons. Here's what she said herself, quote, "Since I got here, it has been very much about inviting more people to the party and making sure that they found a space where they could express who they are," she told Wild. "Our games teach that diversity is a strength. D&D in particular will teach you that together you can overcome tasks, challenges, or an adventure that you wouldn't have been able to do on your own. When you're playing Magic, you're seeing the diversity of the world in the characters," she added. "You see yourself. I love the stories of people playing Dungeons & Dragons and being able to express who they are in that game, which leads them to be able to express who they are in their real life. We're very much cultivating that level of diversity as we're inviting players in. It's fine to invite people in as customers. That's a good thing to do. Anything you can do to build your customer base and create new opportunities to expand on your brand, to find new customers, to have those new customers be passionate about what you're doing, that's fine. The problem is, you do actually have to listen to your existing customers and make sure they're comfortable with literally everything you're doing. It may be in some case that you're doing something that one of your customers or a small percentage of your customers are not happy with, but if a large percentage of your customers are not happy with changes that you're making, for whatever reason you're making those changes, maybe to promote diversity, or maybe it's to raise prices so you could have a larger profit margin. Whatever the decision is, it's not just for diversity. If your customers aren't happy with it, if your customers aren't comfortable with it, you can't make those changes. Even if you really want to, even if you think it's for a good reason. And she's no dummy. She knows this stuff, but she couldn't control herself. She couldn't help herself. Here's my basis for explaining she's actually no dummy. She came to Hasbro having worked for Microsoft and Amazon in important leadership positions. Beyond that, she actually earned a patent on her study of logistics for missing products within a mail order system. Cynthia Williams, the woman in charge at Wizards of the Coast, holds a patent for finding items missing in the mail. In 2018, Cynthia Williams was the general manager and vice president of gaming business expansion at Xbox. It was a job about finding new ways to lure people to Xbox. By 2019, and staying in this role for only 10 months, Williams took that title to the Xbox Business Engineering and Mixer Division. In 2020, Cynthia Williams was the general manager and vice president of Gaming Ecosystem Commercial Team. Cynthia Williams' patent was filed in 2011, and at the time, Williams was working at Amazon. She was at the retail giant for over 11 years, working as the first finance director at Fulfillment by Amazon. After 6 years as finance director and CFO, dealing with analytics in the US, Europe, Japan, and even China, Cynthia became general manager there. From 2013 to 2016, with the patent for sorting out compensation for when items go missing, Cynthia led over 350 people and was responsible for growth and profitability. Part of this was about reducing supply chain costs. This would be potentially a great operations manager. This could be potentially a good president for your division. But you have to box this woman in and tell her what you exactly want her to do so she does just that and doesn't screw around in other areas she doesn't belong in. For example, from Bounding Into Comics, while she was in charge of the popular Magic the Gathering card game, under her leadership, the brand suffered such reputational disasters as the release of a set featuring race-swapped versions of classic The Lord of the Rings characters, a player being threatened with jail time after being accidentally but legally sold a then-upcoming booster box set ahead of a street date, and the introduction of a product release schedule so constant, nearly one set every month, that players have found themselves avoiding buying any new cards whatsoever out of fear that they could be rendered worthless nearly immediately after purchase. And let's dig into some of this. The idea of taking popular licensed brands and mixing them into their Magic the Gathering game series was a good idea. It wasn't her idea. She inherited that when she became president of Wizards of the Coast. At the same time, when you mix franchises together, like Aliens versus Predator, those are exciting things to do, but you have to be very careful about incorporating those two worlds to make sure that the people who support both of those intellectual properties are comfortable with the changes and the interactions that you're making, because of course there have to be some changes, but they didn't have to be this change. From Bounding Into Comics, Wizards of the Coast race swaps Aragorn for Magic the Gathering's upcoming The Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth set. Quote, "Our goal is a modern take on the work of J.R.R. Tolkien." Nope, you can't do a modern take on a historic franchise and then mix it with your franchise. You can't even conceive of doing that. This woman doesn't know stuff like this. She's not familiar with any of the intellectual properties that she had been working with. And no one sat her down and said, look, you can't do stuff like that. This is not like finding a missing package at Amazon. If you have a creative way to figure out how you're going to compensate people for missing packages at Amazon, no one is personally invested in any of that except seeing a good return on investment for, okay, my package was missing, how am I getting compensated, whatever it is. But that's not intellectual properties. That's not stories. Stories people are very personally involved with. So when you make a change in a story, you're forcing a change in an individual, someone who supports that franchise. And the only reason that these franchises have any value is because people personally care about and identify with them. So these changes have to be made very carefully, and you somehow have to do it with the majority of the people who are interested in that existing franchise being interested in these changes happening. Even this idea of mixing different franchises with Magic the Gathering intellectual property is something that customers were not comfortable with. So you have to tread very lightly with this kind of stuff. You can't actually make changes. For example, if you were to have done this, if you were to have said, look, I want to introduce some other race-swapped characters or some additional version of a character that's race-swapped, you could consider doing something like that after you've introduced the franchise crossover. If there wasn't too much pushback, and you need to find a way to ask customers, how do you feel about something like this before you do something like this? From Bounding Into Comics, in the latest example of Western entertainment's seeming obsession with the reimagining of J.R.R. Tolkien's seminal fantasy work in accordance with modern-day identity politics, Wizards of the Coast has revealed that their upcoming Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth set from Magic the Gathering will depict Aragorn as a black man. Previously announced during the company's Magic Showcase 2021, The upcoming Lord of the Rings themed set was teased as allowing players to team up with such established characters as Gandalf, Gollum, Frodo, Aragorn, to battle for the One Ring scheme with Sauron, or journey to the heights of Mount Doom. While some fans anticipated the worst possible handling of the IP given Wizards' reputation in recent years, their fears were partially quelled by a combination of source material accurate piece of artwork depicting Gandalf entertaining the Shire at Bilbo Baggins' birthday party being put forth as the set's main preview image, and a belief that no other interpretation of the series could stoop to the level of Amazon's The Rings of Power. And that's where they were wrong. At least they were until a further preview of the set was given at the opening of this year's Wizards Presents, a similar live stream presentation which touches upon the company's entire catalog of offerings rather than just their popular trading card game. So was it necessary for them to do this? Was it necessary for them to make this change? Of course it wasn't necessary. Of course it didn't bring in one more additional customer or fan. But they did it anyway. Also from Bounding Into Comics, Wizards of the Coast reportedly threatens jail time against player who has accidentally but legally sold upcoming Magic the Gathering set ahead of the official street date. The street date is when product is supposed to be released. A manufacturer will produce products, provide them into distribution, provide them to stores to be released only on a certain date. Occasionally, of course, a store can make a mistake and release product early. That's not that big of a deal, as long as it's not widespread. What you don't want to do is attack your customer base and threaten them with jail time if a mistake is made and you happen to get your hands on something a little sooner than you're supposed to. Seemingly intent on taking home the title of worst tabletop game company of all time, Wizards of the Coast has reportedly responded to a Magic the Gathering player being accidentally sold a booster box of the game's upcoming set ahead of its official release date by employing the services of a particular private security firm to forcefully recover the product. Set to release on May 12th, an upcoming set was accidentally sold to a YouTuber 2 weeks ahead of its scheduled release date. In response, the publisher reportedly hired the Pinkerton detective agency, the very same private security firm who once patrolled the Wild West, to raid Cannon's house and retrieve his legally purchased cards. Another issue with people that come from outside of a collectibles industry is they don't understand that while their customers are very passionate and they're willing to buy almost anything if it's associated with a very popular brand, there is a limit that people reach. You don't want to overproduce things and create a situation where customers can't afford to buy the product anymore. Marvel Comics did this when they were bought by Ronald Perlman, the financier that bought Marvel and then overproduced so much that it essentially broke Marvel and the comic book industry at the time. It was so bad that Bank of America analysts were saying she's too greedy. She's got to cut this out. From Bounding Into Comics, Bank of America market analyst warns Hasbro's greed is killing Magic the Gathering. This recent warning regarding arguably the world's most popular trading card game was leveled on November 14th, courtesy of Bank of America's Equity Research Vice President Jason Haas. Drastically downgrading his target price for Hasbro stock from $73 per share to $42. Haas explained that the primary concern is that Hasbro has been overproducing Magic cards, which has propped up Hasbro's recent results, but is destroying the long-term value of the brand. What also happens with moves like this is you wind up pushing a lot of product into the distribution system. Distributors get the product, retailers get the product, consumers buy the product, but they don't necessarily buy as much. So retail stores, they order product and they wind up buying what would be normal for, say, quarterly new releases rather than monthly new releases. Hasbro gets to book sales short term and say, hey, look at all this stuff we're pushing out the door. Our revenue has increased. Our profit has increased. And it looks good short term. But long term, you have to have some consideration for what your customers will actually absorb. If you don't respect the supply chain gets overloaded and then eventually it will collapse. Recalling his research, Haas noted that of the game's 8 most recent sets, 7 of them have already decreased in value. And some additional headlines from Wizards of the Coast under her terrible management. Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons & Dragons executive Kyle Brink demands white males leave tabletop gaming. Dungeons & Dragons to remove half species from Player's Handbook, claims the entire idea is inherently racist. Dungeons & Dragons to remove term race from game lexicon due to its prejudiced links between real-world and fantasy peoples. I don't know former President Cynthia Williams' work in depth, But I will say, clearly she has some skill set with respect to logistics. If she had just focused on who are our customers, what do our customers really want? How can we make more of these customers? How can we support these customers? If she had actually done her job and focused on those things, instead of treating this job as an opportunity to put in her ridiculous agenda for diversity, equity, and inclusion, she may have actually done very well here. You can't really succeed in a management role at Amazon or Microsoft and effectively do this kind of logistics work without having skills. She just didn't use them. She used the skills to get into a position where she could push an agenda. And as a result of pushing that agenda, she winds up so disconnected from her actual customers that the company has no other choice but to force her to leave. She resigned on April 15th to leave on April 26th. 11 days is not a normal amount of time for a president to leave a public company. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.